people who are not writers and even people who are tend to forget how terrifying sitting down to write is. How much it's planning and outlining, and how much of it is just improvisation at that moment that you're confronting the blank page. So may I ask, when you started work on A Game of Thrones, how much of this history did you know already, and when did you develop all of this history that fills these pages in the book that we have today?
I knew absolutely none of this history. I began Game of Thrones in 1991, in the summer of 1991. I was right in the middle of what I think of as my Hollywood decade, roughly from the mid-'80s through the mid-'90s. I was working primarily in television and film. I was spending a large part of the year out in Hollywood working on Twilight Zone and then Beauty and the Beast. And then I had what they call a development deal, where I was pitching my own pilots and writing movies. But in 1991, for whatever reason, as the summer started, I didn't have any immediate Hollywood assignment, although my agents were trying to get me some. So I said, I haven't written a novel in a few years. Let me start this novel. And I had a science fiction novel that was part of my 1,000 Worlds series of science fiction books called Avalon that I'd been thinking for some time. And I started writing Avalon, and I was, like 3 or 4 chapters in, and suddenly the first chapter, Game of Thrones, came to me, the chapter where they find the direwolf pups in the summer snows. I always knew it was the summer snows. I don't know why, that phrase just stuck in my head. But that chapter came to me so vividly, and it wasn't part of Avalon. I didn't know it was part of it. So I put Avalon aside. I just had to write that, and I wrote that chapter. And then I wrote the next chapter, and then chapter after that, and I just sort of got in a flow. And I wound up working on that all through 1991. I never returned to Avalon. But then I got another Hollywood assignment, so I put it aside, and for the second half of '91 and all of '92 and part of '93, I was working on a television pilot that we thought was going to be a television series. Ultimately, it did not go, which is, of course, is the fate of many things in Hollywood. So around the middle of 1993, '94, I returned to Game of Thrones and picked it up. And to my surprise and delight, it was like instead of setting it down 2 years ago, it was like I'd set it down 2 days ago. The characters were all still very alive. I just got immediately back into it, and I started working on it, and one thing led to another. But when I began it, I didn't...
The point is, this stuff takes time, years and years. Just relax.
I didn't know, at first I thought it might be a short story, this chapter that came, and then at a certain point, I said, no, it's a fantasy, and it's going to be a trilogy. It'll be a trilogy. Everybody was doing trilogies back then. Tolkien set the template. So I said, all right, I'll do a trilogy, and we sold it on that basis. My agent, Kirby McCauley at the time, and his sister Kay, who is here in the audience, a fantastic agent, they went out and sold the trilogy. And I had written other novels. I had written Armageddon Rag, Fever Dream, Dying of the Light, and they all took me about a year to write. So I had Kirby and Kay draw up the contract at 3 books in 3 years. So immediately, I was like 2 years late in the first book.
Sure.
And I was just writing and writing and writing, and pretty soon it was too long to be published in 1 book. So I said, did I say 3 books? No, 4 books. So we changed it and made it 4 books, and then I kept writing, and they started coming out, and at a certain point I said, 6 books. I skipped right over 5. I never thought it would be 5. I thought, and for years I said it's going to be 6 books. And my wife Paris, who's sitting right there, I would get up on a stage like this, I would pound my fist, and I would say, it's going to be 6 books, and she would hold up 7 fingers behind me.